The legend is a bullet fired into the dark, and the truth is the whisper of the wind that carried it, impossible to confirm, impossible to deny. For generations, the American mind has been haunted by one spectral question, asked in saloons, across campfires, and now, across the digital ether: who was the deadliest gunfighter of the Old West? We chase shadows wearing the names of heroes and villains, men whose fame was built on lead and liquor. Yet, to seek a definitive answer is to attempt to measure the wind with a teacup. The figures we revere, the Hickocks, the Hardins, did not merely live. They were immediately encased in a self-serving mythology, their exploits amplified, and their own memoirs penned as theatrical grand opera rather than historical ledger. We are left with a glorious contradiction, a history where the facts are less compelling than the fabrications. This chronicle, therefore, is not a final verdict, nor is it a comprehensive census of every verified kill, for that truth sleeps beneath unmarked graves and vanished court records. This is a humble attempt to pierce the romantic haze with the cold steel of evidence, to strip away the lore and find the core of the killer. It is a necessary reckoning, and I invite you to join it. If you wish to tear a name from this bloody roster, you must replace it with one you deem more worthy, and you must justify the exchange. Stick to the end, and you shall meet a phantom from the annals, a bonus gunfighter whose very existence underscores how much true terror the legends eclipsed. Let us now begin the grim descent into the verified deeds, starting where the reputation far outstrips the documented reality. 10. Johnny Ringo. Johnny Ringo. The very name evokes the image of the brooding, educated outlaw, a man steeped in Shakespeare and quick to the draw, a rival worthy of a shootout beneath the Arizona moon. His reputation, immortalized by Hollywood and the collective nightmare of Tombstone, is that of an effortless killer, an intimidating intellectual menace. Yet, when the heavy ledger of evidence is opened, the pages remain largely blank. Ringo's fame is a spectacular edifice built upon a single grim cornerstone, one documented killing over the course of his entire turbulent life. This act occurred in Texas during the chaotic period known as the Mason County War. In late September of '75, Ringo rode up to the home of Jim Chaney and put him down an undeniable, verifiable murder. Though Ringo would face indictment, the lack of witnesses willing to brave the feud's violence secured his eventual release. Historians, particularly his biographer David Johnson, confirm that any stories beyond this, involving Ringo in a spate of Mason County killings, remain unverified rumors, the smoke of anecdote without the fire of proof. He did shoot another man, Lewis Hancock, upon arriving in Arizona. But the contemporary Arizona Daily Star tells a story that diminishes the legend further. The incident was a drunken dispute over whiskey versus beer. Ringo struck the man with his pistol, the weapon discharged, and Hancock, wounded in the fleshy part of the neck, survived. The newspaper account makes clear that had the bullet traveled half an inch further, the outcome would have been different, but it did not. Ringo's arc ended in the summer of 1882. Found dead with a bullet through his temple, his pistol still in hand, a probable suicide. A final act of self-destruction under the weight of heavy drinking and erratic behavior. The man widely feared as an instrument of death left behind a verified kill count of just 2, one Texan, and tragically, himself. His shadow is vast, but his bloody tally is slight, earning him the starting position on our list as the gap between legend and ledger is widest for him. 9. Butch Cassidy. The name is synonymous with the romance of the outlaw trail. Butch Cassidy, the architect of the Wild Bunch, the gentleman bandit who robbed banks and trains with a smile and a remarkable aversion to lethal violence. He stands as a curious anomaly in the gallery of deadly men, a testament to the idea that fame and firepower do not always converge. Born Robert Leroy Parker in Utah, his path to notoriety began not with a blazing gun battle, but with the almost comical theft of a pie and a pair of trousers. At the tender age of 14, a humble start that belied the scale of his future enterprises. For years, he lived the relatively honest life of a cowboy before the allure of high-stakes banditry, the thundering majesty of a train robbery, the calculated risk of a bank vault pulled him into the vortex of crime. Cassidy was a genius of logistics and escape, managing to outwit posses and Pinkertons for the better part of 2 decades across the American West. His fame was vast, his gang legendary, yet throughout his entire career in the United States, Butch Cassidy, the leader of the most notorious gang of his era, never once took a life. His code, whether born of morality, tactical restraint, or simple luck, remained unbroken. The heat eventually became an inferno, forcing him and his partner, the Sundance Kid, to make a desperate escape to the distant, indifferent mountains of South America. There, they briefly traded their infamy for anonymity, playing the part of legitimate ranchers, but the siren song of easy Bolivian payrolls proved irresistible. It was in this foreign, unforgiving landscape that the story of Butch Cassidy found its tragic, violent conclusion in 1908. Surrounded by the relentless Bolivian authorities in a small boarding house, a brief, desperate exchange of fire erupted. In that final, suffocating minute, Butch Cassidy, or perhaps Sundance, fired the bullet that claimed his single verified victim, a Bolivian soldier. The fight ceased, and in the ensuing terrible silence, a scream was heard, followed by 2 distinct gunshots from within the house. When the soldiers finally breached the structure, they found the 2 American legends dead, a final somber tableau. All evidence points to Cassidy in an act of mercy or shared despair having put the wounded Sundance out of his misery before turning the pistol upon himself, a final self-executed entry into the ledger of death, bringing his total verified kill count to a definitive one, a profound irony for one of the most famous outlaws to ever breathe the free air of the Old West. 8. Clay Allison. If Johnny Ringo's reputation was based on myth, Clay Allison's was based on sheer, unadulterated madness. Allison was an earthquake wrapped in buckskin, a man so volatile, so pathologically unpredictable, that the Confederate Army, an organization forged in the fires of Civil War, found him too unstable for service, and gave him a medical discharge for being maniacal. He was a vortex of chaos who moved through the New Mexico territory, leaving shattered reputations and severed friendships in his wake. Allison was not merely quick to anger. He reveled in spectacle, often stripping down to his bare skin when drunk, a peculiar form of exhibitionism that, on at least one occasion, served as his combat attire in a gunfight. His most documented violence occurred during the bitter land and cattle-fueled Colfax County War in New Mexico. Allison was a fierce partisan, and rumors, thick as the dust of the plains, credit him with felling scores of rivals. Yet, the cold, harsh light of historical verification reveals a smaller, though no less brutal, total. We can definitively confirm the deaths of 3 men at the hands of Clay Allison, Chunk Bear, Pancho Grigo, and Charles Faber. While only 3 are verifiable, it is an act of historical negligence to assume this is his full tally. He was a veteran of the Civil War, though briefly, and it defies belief that a man discharged for being maniacal would not have taken lives during those years of organized slaughter. Furthermore, he was strongly rumored to have participated in several lynchings and fatal knife duels, where evidence is notoriously scarce and witnesses were often too terrified to speak. Clay Allison's legend, unlike Ringo's, is not overstated. It is merely underdocumented. He was a creature of primal violence, a true wild card whose confirmed number of 3 is almost certainly the minimal measure of the terror he inflicted, yet it is all the historical record will allow. He earns his place not for the quantity of his kills, but for the stark, terrifying quality of his insanity. 7. Henry McCarty, Billy the Kid. He is the eternal youth of the American mythos, the fast-shooting, sharp-witted boy who died at 21, leaving behind a legacy that has consumed historians and poets alike. The myth, aggressively propagated by journalists and dime novelists of the era, is that Henry McCarty, better known as Billy the Kid, killed 21 men, 1 for every year of his brief, explosive existence. It is a symmetrical and beautiful lie, a perfect encapsulation of the kid's short, violent life. The reality, as always, is far less neat, though no less compelling. Billy the Kid's confirmed body count, the list of men he is personally and undeniably proven to have shot to death, stands at a sobering yet significant 4. These victims were Wendy Cahill, Joe Grant, Bob Ollinger, and James Bell. That 4 men fell to the kid's gun is proof enough of his danger, but his legend rests not just on the men he killed, but on the wars he participated in. He was a key figure in the bloody and politically charged Lincoln County War, a conflict that saw many men fall. Billy was undeniably present and active in the deaths of several other prominent figures, including Buckshot Roberts and Sheriff Brady, the latter being a pivotal act of revenge for the murder of Billy's patron, John Tunstall. He was also involved in the Blackwater Massacre and the killing of James Carlisle. However, in these chaotic multi-gun engagements, the historical evidence blurs into an irresolvable uncertainty. Who fired the fatal round? It could have been Billy, or it could have been any of his comrades in the regulation-defying Malley. The records only confirm that the young Henry McCarty was directly responsible for 4 fatalities, a number far removed from the sensationalized 21. He was a highly lethal and fiercely dangerous young man, especially when cornered or acting in retribution. His significance, however, is that he stands as the prime example of a figure whose legacy was amplified 100-fold by the emerging media of the era. The actual kill count of 4 is merely the seed from which one of the most enduring and romanticized legends of the entire American West blossomed. 6. Jesse Woodson James. The very soil of Missouri seemed to breed violence in the 1860s, and Jesse Woodson James, born in 1847, was plunged into that maelstrom as a mere teenager, his adolescence forged in the unholy fire of the Civil War. His story is not that of a lone wolf, but of a guerrilla riding under the grim banners of Quantrill and bloody Bill Anderson. This was not the chivalric warfare of formal armies. It was a brutal fratricidal conflict of brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor, where lines of morality dissolved into sheer survival and vengeance. Jesse James, barely 17, was almost certainly deeply involved in the systemic slaughter of the Centralia Massacre. He is famously alleged to have delivered the coup de grace to Major Andrew Johnston himself, an act that marked him as a committed participant in the darkest deeds of the conflict. In this environment of chaos and bloodshed, he undoubtedly took many lives, yet the exact count remains submerged beneath the tides of war and the self-serving silence of his comrades. When the war ended, James merely transitioned the tactics of guerrilla warfare into a long and infamous career of train and bank robbery. Surprisingly, considering his notoriety, the record of his actions post-war yields only one single, definitively verified kill, that of train conductor William Westfall. The operative word, as always, is verified. The rumors, fueled by the sensational press, credited him with far more. He was strongly suspected of the murder of Pinkerton operative Joseph Witcher and the cold-blooded killing of his former neighbor Daniel Eskew. Furthermore, James was known for his ruthlessness within his own gang, likely assassinating his own member, Ed Miller, to eliminate a threat. And like Billy the Kid, his robberies often resulted in collateral damage, such as the death of banker John Sheets, where the identity of the shooter remains frustratingly ambiguous. It is thought, through forensic historical estimates, that Jesse James was probably responsible for around 20 deaths in his lifetime. However, the hard evidence is resistant to confirmation, leaving us with a confirmed tally barely higher than a handful. The majority of his deadly deeds, buried by the very chaos that spawned him, remain pure speculation, placing him on this list as the outlaw whose legend rests heaviest upon the impenetrable curtain of the Civil War as violence. 5. Wild Bill Hickok. If Jesse James represents the ambiguity of war, James Butler Hickok Wild Bill represents the spectacular failure of the truth to compete with performance. He's the template for the Western gunslinger, handsome, long-haired, carrying twin pistols, the epitome of the quick-draw hero. The myth, carefully curated during his own lifetime by journalists who traveled with him, claimed he had killed hundreds of men. It is a number worthy of an epic, but one that crumbles under scrutiny. The reality, meticulously researched by historians like Joseph Rosa, is starkly, almost disappointingly, smaller, a verified kill count hovering between 6 and 7. Like many of his contemporaries, Hickok served during the Civil War. Yet, as noted before, the vast majority of deaths in that conflict were due to disease, not direct combat, and a significant portion of Hickok's service was spent in non-combat roles, such as Provost Marshal. The idea of him being an Old West Rambo, mowing down rebels left and right, lacks any concrete evidence and is almost entirely a romantic fabrication. Hickok's documented lethality occurred predominantly after the war, and these verifiable kills stand as pillars of his enduring fame. The duel with Davis Tutt, 1865, the most famous, a carefully choreographed affair in Springfield, Missouri, over a gambling debt and a woman. Tutt missed. Hickok did not. The Kansas incidents. Later, in his role as a lawman, he took down a pair of drunken, unruly cowboys and an aggressive soldier, necessary acts of frontier justice that nonetheless added to his growing tally. The accidental tragedy. His final verifiable kills occurred in 1871. Hickok killed Phil Coe during a saloon incident. Then, tragically, just moments later, in the adrenaline-fueled aftermath, he accidentally shot and killed his own friend, Deputy Mike Williams. That accidental, final shot marked the end of his killing career. The discrepancy between the legend hundreds and the reality 6 or 7 is one of the most profound in Western history. Wild Bill Hickok's placement at number 5 is not due to the volume of his kills, but to the sheer impact of the few he performed, making him the definitive example of the mythmaker who turned a short list of bloody deeds into an unparalleled legacy of deadly skill. 4. Bass Reeves. The story of Bass Reeves is not merely a tale of deadly efficacy, but a searing testament to justice and defiance in a world structured to deny him both. Born into the brutal dehumanization of slavery in the late 1830s, Reeves's early life was bound to the shackles of servitude. It was the convulsion of the Civil War that provided his opportunity, allowing him to escape bondage and seek refuge in the unforgiving expanse of the Indian Territory, a place now known as Oklahoma. Here, he carved out a life as a free man, learning the land, the language of the tribes, and the unforgiving calculus of frontier survival. His transformation from fugitive slave to icon of the law began in 1875 when he was recruited by the legendary hanging Judge Isaac C. Parker. Reeves was commissioned as one of the very first black deputy U.S. Marshals west of the Mississippi River, an appointment that shattered racial barriers and placed him squarely in the crosshairs of the West's most vicious outlaws. His jurisdiction was a vast, lawless domain of over 75,000 square miles, a territory so dangerous it was known as a haven for murderers, horse thieves, and every stripe of criminal fleeing justice. Reeves faced not only the common criminal element, but also the institutionalized racism and skepticism of the time. Yet, his results spoke a language that transcended prejudice. Over the course of 3 decades of service, riding deep into the territory armed with his integrity and his steady hand, Reeves made over 3,000 arrests. The staggering figure of his captures is almost unmatched in the history of U.S. law enforcement. However, the nature of his work hunting dangerous felons, often alone in remote territories, meant that confrontation was not only likely but inevitable. When the moment of truth arrived, Bass Reeves possessed a lethal skill and an unwavering resolve. His number of verified kills stands at a minimum of 14. This count includes his final documented lethal encounter in 1907, when a man pushing 70 years of age helped defend the town of Muskogee from militant anarchists. While rumors persisted that he may have killed over 20 men, those 14 verified acts of self-defense or duty-bound execution were enough to establish him as one of the most effective and formidable lawmen the West ever produced. Unlike the gunfighters whose fame was built on robbing and killing, Reeves's deadliness was an instrument of order, a terrifying consequence of crossing the thin blue line he so bravely represented. He was a force of nature, a man whose quiet dignity was backed by devastating competence, making him a true terror to those who lived outside the law. His legacy is etched not just in the number of men he killed, but in the 3,000 he brought back alive, defining him as a master of the capture and a master of the kill when necessary. 3. Deacon Jim Miller, Killer Miller. The contrast between the outward demeanor and the inner savagery has rarely been embodied more chillingly than in Deacon Jim Miller. He was a study in contradictions, a devoted Methodist who eschewed the frontier vices of liquor and tobacco, always clad in his signature long black frock coat attributes that earned him the incongruous nickname of Deacon. This facade of piety, however, merely served as a thin veil over a soul of calculated predatory darkness, leading many to know him by his far more fitting moniker, Killer Miller. While the rumor that he murdered his own grandparents was later disproved, Miller's capacity for familial violence was confirmed when he killed his own brother-in-law. His career proper began in Texas, where he bafflingly served as a deputy, yet the blackness within him quickly surfaced. He infamously murdered his own boss, Sheriff Bud Frazier, before dedicating himself to a vocation that truly suited his disposition: assassin for hire. Miller became a cold, efficient instrument of retribution for wealthy, powerful interests, specializing in the contract killing of rivals and enemies. His infamy was such that some even speculated he was the true assassin of Pat Garrett, the man who killed Billy the Kid. Despite being widely credited by historians with a staggering body count ranging between 20 to 40 victims, the verifiable documented number of his kills is a meager 6. This profound discrepancy speaks volumes about Miller's method of operation. Unlike the gunfighters who fought in spectacular duels, Miller conducted his business entirely in the shadows. His victims were often ambushed, shot in the back, or simply disappeared. They were the disenfranchised, the isolated, and the marginalized, the people whose deaths would attract little attention or investigation in the vast corrupt frontier. Miller himself allegedly boasted of killing so many Mexicans along the border that he lost count, a chilling admission that highlights his targeting of the vulnerable. He was suspected and arrested multiple times for murder, but the evidence, often circumstantial and relying on the testimony of terrified locals, was rarely sufficient for a conviction. Jim Miller's true deadliness lies not in the size of his verified list of 6, but in the knowledge that this number is profoundly incomplete. He was a professional operating with the clinical precision of a shadow, and his legacy is a sinister warning. Sometimes, the most deadly killers are the ones who make the least noise, allowing their confirmed deeds to be obscured by the sheer number of the unverified lost. He stands as the embodiment of the contract killer in the Old West, a devout man who carried death like a silent, terrible sermon. 2. Tom Horn. The ascent to the penultimate position on this grim list is claimed by a man who once declared, with chilling professional detachment, that killing was his specialty and that he held a corner on the market. Tom Horn was the embodiment of the West's transition from chaos to corporatized violence, a stone-cold killer whose skills were commodified and hired out to the highest bidder. Born in Missouri in 1861, Horn's life was a relentless cycle of self-reinvention across the frontier. He began as an esteemed Army scout, achieving fame for his role in the capture of the Apache leader Geronimo, proving his early efficacy in tracking and combat. He dabbled in ranching, even fought in Cuba with Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders, but his true calling lay in the darkness. Horn eventually found work as a Pinkerton operative and more significantly as a range detective, a euphemism that thinly veiled his true profession. a hired killer employed by wealthy cattle barons to eliminate rival homesteaders and sheep herders during the brutal range wars of Wyoming and Colorado. Horn performed the bulk of his work, much like Jim Miller, in absolute secrecy, specializing in the long-range ambush. His downfall arrived in 1901 with the controversial murder of 14-year-old Willie Nickel. Following a confession that historians argue was possibly coerced, Horn was convicted and subsequently hanged, a just fate for a lifetime of calculated murder, even if the verdict on that specific incident remains debated. The question that defines his place here is simply, how many men truly fell to the marksman's rifle of Tom Horn? Stripping away the exaggerations and the campfire tales, the historical consensus places Horn's verified total at approximately 17 lives taken. This count does not even attempt to definitively catalog the bodies from the intense Apache fighting he participated in, nor the rumors that he and his boss, Al Sieber, indiscriminately murdered Native Americans in their downtime. The bulk of that verifiable count was accumulated during his career as an enforcer. 17 verified kills committed through professional, dispassionate assassinations is a number that registers in the territory of a serial killer. Horn's chilling effectiveness was rooted in his anonymity and his employer's wealth, which shielded him from the law for years. It is highly probable, given his own declaration about his specialty, that the final tally was higher. But 17 is the number proven to have been slain by the man who treated death not as a matter of passion or accident, but as a profitable specialized trade. He was the frontier's ultimate weaponized pragmatist, an assassin who defined the dark side of the West's closing era. 1. John Wesley Hardin. The man who stands at the apex of this lethal hierarchy is arguably the most terrifying on the list because, unlike all others, he seemed to kill not out of duty, desperation, or employment, but out of a deep-seated, almost joyful affinity for the act itself. John Wesley Hardin was not a marshal like Reeves, nor a hired hand like Horn, nor a traditional train robber like James. He was simply and devastatingly good at killing, and he openly claimed to enjoy it. Hardin's reputation is laced with the apocryphal and the extreme. He is the only man on this list credibly rumored to have killed a man simply for snoring too loudly. He was a Texas native whose violence began early and escalated exponentially. His first killing occurred at the age of 15. A mere couple of weeks later, he gunned down 3 soldiers who were sent to arrest him. In his own words, describing his ambush of those soldiers, he declared, "I laid them as I had no mercy on men whom I knew only wanted to get my body to torture and kill. It was a war to the knife for me, and I brought it on by opening the fight with a double-barreled shotgun and ended it with a cap-and-ball 6-shooter. This mentality, a relentless preemptive self-defense against perceived enemies, defined the next decade of his life. From the dusty trails of Texas to the wide-open spaces of Kansas, and even as far east as Florida, Hardin left a devastating trail of fatalities. He was not a traditional outlaw, but rather a chaotic traveler whose personal war against the world resulted in an unprecedented loss of life. He was eventually captured, sentenced to 25 years in the Huntsville State Penitentiary. Remarkably, while incarcerated, he studied law and earned a degree, yet his subsequent release and brief attempt at legitimacy ended as his life began, with a fatal return to his old ways. He was finally killed by Constable John Selman in El Paso in 1895. As for his official, bloody record, Hardin himself claimed to have killed over 40 men. While this number is certainly inflated by ego, the verified kill count is nonetheless staggering, approximately 20 men. The sheer concentration of this violence is what separates Hardin from his contemporaries. These 20 verifiable deaths took place in less than a decade, from the fall of 1868 up to his arrest in 1877. To have slain 20 people in such a short span of time, without the systemic cover of being a lawman, a Civil War veteran, or a professional enforcer, is mind-boggling. It speaks to a man who engaged in near-constant lethal confrontation, defining him as the undisputed, most efficient killer on this list. John Wesley Hardin was the walking, breathing embodiment of terminal violence, earning him the #1 spot, where the evidence is nearly as chilling as the legend itself. The 10 men above represent the bloodiest strata of verified killers the Old West produced. Yet, as noted at the outset, this list is fundamentally flawed by the very nature of history. The celebrity killer who garnered headlines often overshadows the forgotten killer who operated without a witness or a newspaper reporter. The true horror of the frontier era rests not just with the Jesse Jameses or the Wild Bills, but with the scores of men who left behind no myth, only a body count swallowed by the vastness of the plains. This is the moment, then, to honor the forgotten, the ghost who truly earned the moniker of Deadly, but whose obscurity allows him to slip between the cracks of fame and remembrance. I give you the bonus gunfighter, a man whose single confirmed engagement puts even the celebrated totals of this list to shame.